There is one thing in my grandmother's kitchen that she never once let go to waste. Not the bread heels, not the bacon grease, not the bones from Sunday's chicken, but there was one thing she guarded more carefully than any of those, and it was something so ordinary that you would walk past it in your own kitchen a dozen times a day without a second thought. She was a woman who wasted nothing. I mean that the way it sounds, not as a figure of speech. The water she boiled potatoes in went onto the flower beds before it ever reached the drain. The ash from the wood stove went into a bucket by the door, never the trash. Every scrap of vegetable peel had a destination before it ever became garbage. In her kitchen, the word waste did not mean what it means in most homes today. It meant a failure to see what something was still capable of becoming. The egg, not the egg you eat. The egg that has gone past the point of eating. The one sitting in the back of the icebox that nobody wants to risk anymore. In most kitchens today, that egg goes in the trash. In my grandmother's kitchen, that egg went into the ground. And what came up out of that ground, season after season, year after year, was something that no bag of store-bought fertilizer has ever matched in my 60-some years of watching things grow. I remember the exact spot in the kitchen where the egg basket sat, up on a shelf by the window where the morning light hit it first. She would lift each egg, turn it once in her hand, and somehow know, the way she knew so many things without explaining how, which ones were still good for the skillet and which ones were past it. The good ones went to the table. The ones that were past it never went to waste. They went to her apron pocket, and from her apron pocket to wherever in the garden needed them most that week. I can still see the apron. It was a faded blue with small flowers on it, and there was always a deep pocket on the front, the kind that could hold a great deal more than you would expect from looking at it. That pocket carried clothespins, a folded handkerchief, sometimes a few seeds saved from last year's best plant, and on the right day, an egg that had no business going anywhere near a skillet anymore. She moved through her garden the same way every morning, slow and deliberate, stopping at certain plants longer than others. And I did not understand until much later that she was reading those plants the way another person might read a letter, looking for what they were trying to tell her. I'm going to show you exactly what she did, and I'm going to tell you exactly why it works, because I did not believe it myself until I dug into the soil with my own hands and saw it. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a man who is easily convinced of things. I have lived long enough to see a great many products come and go, each one promising to be the answer to whatever was wrong with a garden that year. Most of them were not the answer. Most of them were a bag of something expensive that produced a result for 2 weeks and then needed buying again. What my grandmother did with a single egg outlasted every one of those products in every comparison I ever made. And I made many comparisons over many years, because I am the kind of man who needs to see a thing prove itself before he will speak of it as truth. Take a whole egg. Do not crack it. Do not boil it. Do not separate the white from the yolk. Take the whole egg, shell and all, and bury it 6 inches down in the soil where you are about to plant a tomato, a pepper, a rose, or a young fruit tree. Cover it, water it, and then walk away and let the ground do what the ground knows how to do. That is the whole of it. No special tools, no measuring cups of powder, no trip to a store, an egg, a hole, and patience. I know how strange that sounds in a world that has convinced most people that a healthy garden requires a shelf full of products with long names and longer instructions. I am telling you that one of the most effective things you can do for a tomato plant is sitting in your refrigerator right now, and you have probably thrown several of them in the trash this year already, without knowing what they were capable of. People ask me if this is some kind of old wives' tale. I tell them, no. I tell them this is chemistry that my grandmother understood through nothing more than watching, long before anyone wrote it down in a book. She never once used the word chemistry. She would not have known what I meant if I had used it in front of her. What she knew was this: plants that grew near where eggs had been buried did better than plants that did not. She watched this happen across enough seasons, on enough plants, that the pattern became as certain to her as the sunrise. She did not need a laboratory to prove what 50 years of careful watching had already proven to her satisfaction. I have come to believe that this kind of knowledge, earned through decades of attention rather than through a degree on a wall, deserves more respect than it is given in the world today. I have sat in rooms with people who have studied agriculture formally, who have letters after their names, and I have listened to them explain, almost word for word, the same things my grandmother explained to me 60 years ago without ever once setting foot in a classroom past the 8th grade. The science has caught up to what she always knew. It took longer to catch up than it should have, because for a very long time, the kind of knowledge that comes from a woman watching her garden for 50 years was not considered knowledge at all. It was considered superstition, until someone with the right credentials said the same thing in different words, and suddenly it became science. The shell of an egg is almost entirely calcium. The same calcium that builds strong bones in a child is the same calcium that builds strong cell walls in a tomato plant. Without enough of it, a tomato cannot hold itself together properly, and you see the result every August on the vines of half the gardens in this country. That dark, sunken, rotten patch at the bottom of the fruit. Most people think it is a disease. It is not a disease at all. It is a plant that has been starving for calcium the entire season, and there was nothing anyone did about it because nobody told them an egg could fix it. I want to say this plainly, because I think it is the single most important sentence in everything I am telling you today. You cannot spray that rot away. You cannot fix it once it has already started on the fruit hanging on the vine. The only thing that works is preventing it from the beginning by making sure the plant has calcium available in the soil from the moment it is planted. Most gardeners discover the rot in July or August and reach for a spray, and the spray does nothing because the problem was never on the leaf. The problem was always 6 inches down in soil that never had what the plant needed from the start. The white of the egg is mostly water, but inside that water is protein, and that protein breaks down slowly into nitrogen, the very thing every leaf and every stem needs to grow strong and green. Not a fast burst of nitrogen that burns through a plant in 2 weeks and leaves it hungry again. A slow, steady feeding that lasts the whole season, the way a meal that is eaten slowly satisfies longer than one that is rushed. I have watched gardens fed on quick synthetic nitrogen go through the same cycle every single year, a burst of green growth, a slow decline as the nitrogen runs out, another application, another burst, another decline. It is a cycle that never ends and never improves because the soil itself is never actually getting healthier. It is simply being fed a meal it forgets the moment the meal is finished. The egg does not work this way. The egg becomes part of the soil itself, slowly, the way a good meal becomes part of the body that eats it rather than passing through and leaving nothing behind. And the yolk. The yolk is the part that most people never think about at all. Inside that yolk is iron, zinc, magnesium, fat, and a richness of nutrition that took a hen weeks to build inside her body. When that yolk breaks down in the soil, it feeds something you cannot see with your own eyes, but that is more important than almost anything else happening underground. It feeds the living organisms in the soil. The bacteria, the fungi, the microscopic life that has been there since before you or I were ever born, doing the actual work of turning dirt into something a plant can eat. I did not always believe any of this. I will tell you the truth. The first time my grandmother told me to bury an egg under a rose bush, I thought she had lost her senses. I thought eggs belonged in a skillet, not in the dirt. I was a young man, and young men think they know better than their grandmothers. I learned, as most young men eventually do, that I did not. I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because I think the specifics matter more than the general claim. That spring, she had me dig the hole myself, 6 inches down, at the edge of where the rose's roots would eventually reach. She handed me the egg from her apron and told me where to place it. I covered it, not believing a word of what she had told me, but doing as I was told, because that was simply how things were in our house. I did not think of that rose bush again until the middle of summer, when I noticed it standing taller and fuller than the 3 other rose bushes along the same fence line, all planted the same spring, all given the same water, all in the same soil. That rose bush outgrew every other rose bush on the property within 2 seasons. Bigger blooms, deeper color, less trouble from disease than any of the others. I went back to her and asked what she had done differently, expecting some secret tonic or some trick with the pruning shears. She told me it was the egg. Nothing more than that. One egg buried 6 inches down at the time of planting. I remember standing there feeling foolish, the way you feel when something simple has been right in front of you, and you spent your energy looking everywhere else for an explanation. She did not gloat about it. She was not the kind of woman who gloated. She simply nodded, the way she nodded at most things, as though the world had once again confirmed something she had known for 60 years and had no particular need to celebrate. I did not believe her the first time. I believed her after I tried it myself on my own tomatoes the following spring. That first season with my own tomatoes, I split the row in half without telling anyone what I was doing. Eggs buried under one half, nothing under the other half, same variety, same spacing, same care in every other way. By August, the difference was not subtle. It was not the kind of difference you have to squint to see or convince yourself is real. The half with the eggs stood darker green, held more fruit, and showed almost none of the rot that plagued the other half by the time the season turned hot and dry. I have not planted a tomato without an egg in the hole since that summer, and that summer was a very long time ago now. Here is exactly how to do it, the way it was taught to me. I'm going to walk you through this exactly the way she walked me through it. Because I think the specific steps matter more than a general idea of burying an egg somewhere near a plant. Doing it correctly is the difference between the full benefit and a wasted egg. Dig your hole 6 inches deep, right at the edge of where the plant's leaves will eventually reach, what some call the drip line. Not directly under the stem where you might disturb the roots that are already there. At the edge where the feeder roots will grow into it over the following weeks. Place the whole egg in that hole, shell, white, yolk, all of it, untouched. Cover it completely with soil. Press it down firm. Water it well, the same as you would water any new planting. Then you wait. In warm soil, within 4 to 6 weeks, you will begin to see the difference. The leaves will be a deeper green than the plants around them that did not receive an egg. By the time fruit begins to set, you will see fewer of those dark, sunken spots that ruin a tomato before it ever ripens. By the end of the season, when you pull the plant up to clear the bed for winter, you will find roots reaching further and branching more than anything you have grown without this old practice. I want you to pay particular attention to that root system since the end of the season, because it tells you something that the leaves and the fruit cannot tell you on their own. A plant with a strong, branching, deep root system is a plant that will handle next year's dry spell better, next year's cold snap better, next year's stress of any kind better, even if you never plant another egg in that exact spot again. The benefit does not end when the season ends. It builds into the soil itself, season after season, the same way a good habit builds into a person's character over years, rather than disappearing the moment the habit stops being practiced. I want to be honest with you about the one thing people worry about, because I worried about it too the first time: the smell. An egg breaking down underground does produce a gas, and if you bury it too shallow or in soil that is loose and sandy, you may catch a whiff of it for a week or two. Bury it the full 6 inches down. Pack the soil firm above it. Water it in well. Do this correctly, and in all the years I have done this, I have smelled it at the surface only once, in a bed of very sandy soil where I had not buried deep enough. Every other time, nothing. The ground keeps its secrets the way it is meant to. I tell people this concern honestly because I do not want anyone trying this and feeling deceived afterward if something unexpected happens. The ground is honest with you if you are honest with it. Bury deep enough, and it holds what you give it without complaint. Bury shallow, in loose soil, and it will let you know in its own way that you did not do the job correctly. I would rather tell you this plainly now than have you discover it on your own and wonder if you had been misled. Tomatoes benefit the most from this practice because tomatoes are the plant most likely to suffer from that calcium-starved rot at the base of the fruit. One egg at planting time. A second egg buried the same way about 8 weeks later, right as the plant begins setting its heaviest fruit. Roses benefit nearly as much because roses are hungry plants that bloom better with steady calcium than with any fast-acting product from a shelf. Young fruit trees benefit for years to come because the slow feeding from 2 or 3 eggs buried around the drip line at planting time supports root growth through the tree's most important early seasons, when the roots it grows determine how strong that tree will be for the rest of its life. I planted 3 apple trees on my own property many years ago, and I buried eggs at all 3, around the drip line the way I'm telling you now. Those 3 trees outpaced every other young tree I have planted since, without that step, by a margin that I cannot explain through anything other than what was sitting in the ground beneath them in those first critical seasons. A tree's first 2 or 3 years determine the root architecture it will rely on for the rest of its life, which may be 50 years, 80 years, longer than I will be alive to see. What you do for a tree in those first seasons is a gift to a future you may never personally witness. There was a year when I nearly lost one of those apple trees. A hard freeze came late, after the buds had already opened, and I watched the blossoms turn black overnight and thought the tree was finished for that season at the very least. But the roots held. The tree pushed new growth within weeks, recovered fully by midsummer, and produced fruit that autumn as though the freeze had never happened. I have always believed that the root system built in those first seasons, fed by eggs my grandmother taught me to bury, was the reason that tree had the reserves to recover from a setback that should have cost it the entire year. A weak root system does not have that kind of reserve to draw on. A strong one does. I want to tell you something else, something that goes beyond the chemistry, because I think it matters just as much as the calcium and the nitrogen. My grandmother did not learn this from a book. Nobody in her family ever read it in a magazine or saw it on a television program, because in her time, there was no television in our homes at all. She learned it the way all of the old practices were learned, from her mother, who learned it from her own mother before that. Burying something whole and useful into the ground that fed you, trusting that the ground would turn it into something that fed you again, was not a trick. It was simply how things were done before there were bags on a shelf promising to do the same work for a price. I think about that every time I crack an egg in the morning and look at the shell in my hand before I decide where it goes. Most days, into the compost. But some days when I am planting something new, that egg goes whole into the ground, the same way my grandmother taught me, the same way I have taught my own children, so that what she knew does not disappear the way so much else from her time already has. There is so much that disappears between one generation and the next without anyone deciding it should. Nobody sits down and decides to forget how their grandmother fed a rose bush. It simply happens, quietly, because the television arrived, and then the products arrived, promising to do the same work faster, and the slower knowledge that required watching and patience got pushed aside for something that came in a bag with instructions printed on the back. I do not blame anyone for that. I understand why it happened, but I have made it my purpose, in whatever years I have left, to make sure that what was given to me does not end with me. I am an old man now, older than my grandmother was when she first handed me that egg and told me where to dig. I think about her every single time I plant something new, which in a garden is more often than you might expect, because a garden is never finished, only ever in the middle of becoming something else. I do not know how many more seasons I have left to plant things and watch them grow. What I do know is that for as long as I am able, I will keep burying eggs in the ground the way she taught me, and I will keep telling anyone willing to listen exactly why it works, because the alternative is letting something true and useful disappear simply because nobody thought it was worth passing on. If you try nothing else I have ever told you, try this one. It costs you nothing but an egg you were probably going to throw away regardless. It asks for 6 inches of digging and a little patience, and it gives back more than I think you will expect, the same way it gave back more than I expected, more years ago than I care to count. Tell me in the comments if you try it this season, and tell me what you see. I read every single one, and I answer the ones I can, because hearing how this works in someone else's garden, in soil different from my own, in a climate I have never stood in myself, is one of the genuine pleasures left to me at my age. And if what I have shared today was useful to you, I would be grateful if you would give it a thumbs up and consider staying with me, because I have a great deal more of what my grandmother taught me stored up after all these years, and I intend to share every bit of it before I'm through telling it.